Welcome to the Insight Scoop, Ion Ivy's podcast series that provides direct insight into the world of college applications and profile building. My name is Shanza Khan, and I'm the head counselor and founder at Ion Ivy. Today's episode is all about the essential yet dreaded financial aid application. We know that the process is often long, tiresome, and hectic, but we've cracked the code for you. Joining us today is a passionate advocate all the way from Vienna, Austria. Having recently graduated from Vienna International School, Ranea Amir will be studying culture, politics, and society at the Central European University and aims to major in law and government. Stay tuned to learn all the details about the financial aid process in this episode of the Inside Scoop. Let's get started. So, Rania, welcome today.
Hello.
Let's begin at the very foundational part of this conversation. How important was the cost of attending college for you when curating your college list and choosing which countries to apply to? Did the financial aspect play a large role in initially determining where you chose to apply? Because you had many options. You have family in Pakistan, you were looking at the US and other parts of the world. Tell our listeners and viewers, how did you decide which countries to apply to and what role the financial aid process played?
So I applied to the US, I applied to Pakistan, and I applied to Austria, and I also applied to the Netherlands. And I would say that financial opportunity did play a large part because before I applied, I always checked to see if there were financial aid or scholarship offers, and then I applied to those simultaneously while also just doing the normal application.
So, in other words, you selected not just the countries, but specific universities where you felt you had a large chance of securing a scholarship, correct?
Yes, that's true. I I also chose the countries based on where it would be affordable overall for me, where I had family staying or where the university was just offering large financial aid packages or just had scholarship opportunities.
So, in your research, Rania, which countries did you identify as being the most financially generous to an international student? You hold a Pakistani passport. It's not as, you held the citizenship of another country that you could bank on. So, as an international student, when you were doing your research, share with the audience that amongst the different countries you looked at, which tend to be more generous for international students?
I would say that the US gives the largest amount of money for financial aid, and they are the ones who give it more often. But from my experience, the colleges are already very, very expensive. And sometimes the aid they give a lot, but sometimes it's still not enough. So sometimes from my experience, well, I didn't negotiate because I just decided to study in Austria. But I've heard from the experiences of other students that I personally know that you can negotiate financial aid with them. So I would say that the US is the most generous in terms of that. But there are also certain universities, private universities in English in Europe, that are already affordable without even having to apply for financial aid, such as the university I chose. But regardless of that, they do give some extra financial aid if you need it based on merit.
So I think you touch on a very important point. So let's break this down further. I agree with you that the United States is one of the most generous countries when it comes to financial aid. However, the cost, as you mentioned, of not just education, but accommodation and living is so high in the US that even with generous scholarships, it still does not fall into, the gambit of a typical Pakistani family. Even if your family is well off, in your case, your father is a diplomat and you receive generous financial scholarships from different US universities, and it still tends to be out of the budget for the vast majority of Pakistani families. For the sake of our viewers, Generally speaking, I want you to know that the cost of a public university in the US is typically between 35 to 55K all in. And for a private university, it's usually between 80 to 100K all in per year. That's a lot of money. So what you did a very, very strategic approach, what we call Rania in our jargon. You decided to choose countries in Europe where the tuition fee itself is so low that whether you get a scholarship or not, it still tends to be something that Pakistani families can reach to. I noticed you did not mention the UK. Share with our audience why.
I didn't apply there because from my experience, I was in my high school and I had seen that the only people who were mostly applying there were already UK citizens because the tuition fee was reduced. And for other Europeans, well, Brexit happened, so they had to pay the same price as us Pakistanis. And I'm not sure if it's true, but I did hear from international applicants that getting financial aid is very, very, very rare and a lot more rare than the US or even than some other places in Europe. So I just decided to not apply there and focus my energy on applying to other places.
The rumors you have heard are correct. The
Oh.
UK, unfortunately, when it comes to undergraduate financial aid, is very stingy. Most students get anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 pounds off their tuition, which is nothing. And if you're paying annual tuition of around 26,000 pounds per year or 20,000 pounds per year, and that's just tuition, we're not even talking about living expenses. It once again goes out of budget. So now let's talk about the countries that you did apply to in Europe. You mentioned the Netherlands and, of course, where you did high school from, which is Vienna. Tell me about the rankings of these universities in your subject area that led you to decide on them, and share with our audience what is the tuition cost of the university CEU where you've decided to attend, as well as I believe you have secured a scholarship as well, what that process was like.
Okay, so when I applied to CEU, on their application portal, there was a little checkbox that said, click this if you need financial aid, and it said that they offer it based on merit. And I just clicked the box and I didn't have to do anything extra. So first I got in and the tuition fee for a year was 7,000 euros in total. But then 1 or 2 months later, I got an email saying that I would be getting financial aid of 2,000 euros, 2,500 euros per year. So now I have to pay 4,500 euros per year. And the application process for me was pretty much the same as just normally applying. They just gave the financial aid a bit later after I had already secured my position. And I also applied to the Netherlands, and there was an opportunity at Maastricht University for global studies where they basically just chose one person and financed their living costs and their whole tuition fee. Well, I didn't get that, but I'm just going through the process of what I did to apply for it. And for that, I had to write an extra essay of why I would be a good ambassador. And then I was called to an interview, and the interview was the second step, sort of. So first you had to write an essay, and if they liked what you wrote, they called you for an interview to further determine who would get it. And in the end, they chose just one applicant, which wasn't me, but just going through the process of what I did and also putting that out there that there is an opportunity like that, and there are probably other opportunities like that in the Netherlands too in terms of financial aid. They're just very competitive.
Well, I think the point that I want to kind of really highlight, underscore, italicize is the tuition fee that you mentioned for Central European University. 7,500 or 7,000?
7,000 euros per year.
7,000 euros per year. Guys, that is a steal. Can you share with us some of the figures for the other European universities you got in, if you recall? Do you recall what it was in Tilburg or Maastricht? What was the tuition fee over there? Please share with our audience.
Well, for Pakistani citizens, since we are not in the EU, it was 10 to 14K just for the tuition. But then living costs is another issue that was like 10 to 12K, depending on what kind of luxurious apartment you want to rent. It depended on that. But for the tuition fee, it was just between 10 to 14K, which is actually quite a lot. Um, but as I said, there are some rare financial opportunities to look for there too. You just have to really dig in deep, and I'm sure you can find something for your course. It's just competitive, but you can always try.
10 to 12,000 euros, while it seems a lot, Rania, if I put this in perspective
Mm-hmm.
of what colleges charge globally, I would say the tuition costs in Europe are a steal. If you just look at the UK, for instance, we're talking, anywhere between 20 to 26,000 pounds a year. If you're talking US, as I said, for a private education, you're looking at 80 to 100K per year. So compared to that, 10 to 12 is still something I think that, while a significant sum of money, much, much less than what these other countries offer. Now, to your second point, so the first thing I want our listeners to be aware of is the tuition cost itself is significantly lower than in other parts of the world. The second thing, which Rani, I would like you to explain the process, because I know you looked at the rankings of these universities through Times Higher Education and QS Top Rankings for your major, which was law and government. And I believe that these universities like Tilburg and so on are in the top 100 programs in the world.
Yes, I got into the global law program at Tilburg University, which was one of the highest ranked in the world, but I'm not sure what exactly it was because I didn't memorize it, but I do know that it was up there. And as for Central European University, basically there are three broad bachelor programs. There's culture, politics, and society, and data science and society, and then there's politics, philosophy, and economics. And you choose one of these three, and then there are a bunch of majors and minors if you do the 4-year program that you can choose from within these three major areas, and you choose your major in the second year. So in the first year, you just get like a broad overview of everything. And the bachelor's programs are relatively new, and CEU isn't really ranked total as a university, but it's ranked according to the subjects in the QS World Rankings. And I do know that for these little specific subject areas like law and government and political science, I think it was ranked in one of the top 25 of the world. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I also do know that this is a fun fact about CEU. They have the largest social sciences library in Europe, from what I've seen.
Wow, I was not aware of that. So that's amazing. I did see pictures. It seemed very futuristic
Mm-hmm.
to me, with its glass buildings and structures. And I think that is, you've spent some time in Europe, but for those students who are growing up in Pakistan, they tend to view Europe with a little apprehension, as if somehow it's backward or it's not as advanced as UK or the US. I see some apprehension among students. Let me ask you a question to clear, some misconceptions that students have. Rania, what is the language of instruction in the programs you applied?
English, just English, honestly, just overall English. But I was considering applying at the University of Vienna because I'm proficient in German, and I've heard apparently that in some schools in Pakistan, students are learning German. And if you know German, then that and you're comfortable enough to study in it, then that's very good for you because even for international students, like the fee is between just 30 euros per semester to 1,000 euros.
Wow.
Yeah, I know my friend from Brazil applied to the University of Aachen in Germany, and she just had to pay 34 euros per year because she knows German and she got into a good chemistry program there. So, yeah, there's also
So
that.
you shared, yeah. So, two things I want our listeners to understand. One, there are many programs now which are entirely in English, just like the one that Rania is going to be inshallah doing. But and so one can directly apply for that if you don't have or if you're not proficient enough with a second language like German or French or so on. But if you have learned German or French or are proficient enough in another language, then most of the public universities in these countries are entirely free of cost. 34, euros per year is fair change. So she really landed a deal. So, that's something for I would like students to kind of take into consideration, particularly if you have adverse financial circumstances. I know that many students, as you mentioned, Rania, in Pakistan, are now learning a second language in school, whether it is German, whether it is Mandarin, whether it is French. And I would advise those students that pick that second language, keeping in mind perhaps a target country where you would like to apply to for your undergrad. So if you're taking Mandarin, you may want to think about China. China has some of the best programs, particularly for engineering and AI now. They have a few programs in English, but most of their programs continue to remain in Mandarin. And even if you're looking at a satellite campus in China, like NYU Shanghai or Duke-Cushan, then even then, I think it's always great to know the language of the local area to be able to integrate with people outside of university campus as well. So you bring up an excellent point, Rania. You also mentioned negotiating financial aid offers once you've been admitted, and that even though you didn't go through that process, that is an option. And I just wanted to talk to our audience that I think students shy away from negotiating financial aid. I don't believe there's a culture for that in Europe, though. Correct, Rania?
No, there really isn't. I mean, I would say it's really different than Pakistani culture in some ways. I'm gonna put some non-academic examples out there. Like in Pakistan, people will be fighting over the bill because they think it's shameful to let someone pay for the bill. But in Europe, you offer to pay for the bill and no one fights over it. They just thank you and let you pay for everything. And yeah, and in Pakistan, there's also another thing from my experience where if someone offers you food, you're not supposed to take too much because you're going to be seen as greedy. Well, that's what I've been taught from adults in my life. But in Europe, if someone offers you something and you say no, that's considered rude. And if you take as much as you can and you keep eating as much as you can, that's seen as good manners because you like the food that they're giving you. So I would say it's kind of the same culture in college applications. They really do not care if you ask for more money or ask them if there's more opportunities you can look into.
I love the examples that you have shared, Rania, and I think everyone can relate to it. Fighting over the bill at the restaurant. I think all of us have been to a family outing with a father and an uncle fighting over who's going to pay for the bill. And so I do want our listeners to take into consideration that as far as Europe and particularly America is concerned, I would, in fact, encourage you to go out of your way to negotiate financial aid. Now, there are certain ways of how you can go about doing that. We'll we can have another conversation on how to negotiate financial aid. But at this particular point, I will stress that it is something one ought to do. I think many students feel that if they ask for financial aid, their offer will be revoked. So that is just something I want to emphasize cannot happen. That if you request for more financial aid consideration, they may say no to that, but they're not going to revoke your offer based on you asking for more financial aid. The other part of the process that I wanted to highlight, Ranea, is you taking out the time and making the effort to apply to different scholarships, which are competitive and may or may not happen, but you have to take the initiative to do the work, to write an essay. And then, as you said, step 2 of the process was to go through an interview. But those are very competitive scholarships sometimes when you're trying to land the full tuition scholarship when it comes to Europe. But thank goodness the fee is already substantially low. So
Really
I
low.
will talk about the CSS and financial forum in a minute as far as the US is concerned. But is there anything equivalent for Europe first, Ranea? Does Europe take into account financial need for internationals or no?
For Europe, I would say it's more heavily merit based on international applicants rather than just need based. So yeah, it's the main thing. And for Europe, there isn't really a CSS profile. As I mentioned earlier, when I was applying to CEU, there was just like a little box that I ticked. But sometimes you will have to make an extra video and make it unlisted on YouTube so the admissions committee can review that. Or sometimes there are interviews, sometimes there are extra essays. And mainly it's just based on that rather than facts and figures about your family's income.
Okay. So that is, for our listeners, that is a very different process from how the US operates. And I just want to touch that on a little bit because we have a lot of students who apply to the US with a very significant difference coming in this year. Up till this year, international students for the US, and I know that you did as well, your parents submitted the CSS financial form, correct, Rania?
Yes, they did.
And that is a very lengthy and difficult financial form that parents have to fill out, where they also have to document their tax returns, their bank statements, their income, and so on. And essentially, how this process works is that this third party organization calculates what your EFC is going to be, your expected family contribution. Generally speaking, most Pakistani families, unless you're landed, unless you're an industrialist, qualify for very generous EFC. Like they expect the family to contribute around maybe $8,000 to $12,000 a year, with the university picking up the rest of the bill. So when you see organizations, including ourselves, posting that this student has received $60,000 or $55,000, it's usually based on need, not on merit, as is the case in Europe. However, there are only 7 universities in the US which are need blind for internationals. All the others, including the ones that you applied to, were need aware. In other words, when you are telling them, I need approximately $70,000 in financial aid, they will factor that into their calculus. Should we give Rania admission or not? Because if we give her admission, we will also have to give her the 70,000 in aid. So that's a very difficult dilemma for most international students, because that space has become so competitive that even with really, really good grades and good extracurriculars, one can certainly target these universities, and they're about 100 or so. But then students from all over the world are targeting the same 100 or so universities which meet full EFC for internationals. So there are very few spots with a lot of competition around them. The other issue is that the CSS is moving away from uh, calculating your EFC, your expected family contribution, on the basis from income to assets this year. So Rania, you actually were one of the lucky ones that the institution was only taking into account your parents' income. From this year onwards, they will not only take into account income, but assets. The problem is most Pakistani families tend to invest in plots or have agricultural lands and so on. And that is going to be factored in now. So, unfortunately, viewers do expect higher EFC amounts going this year forward. Once again, it kind of comes back to the point why we requested Rania to be one of our guests and the lessons learned from her experience, which are she applied to the US, but she also selected countries, including other countries in Europe, like the Netherlands, which is not where she is, based on multiple factors surrounding her financial aid circumstances. So, countries where the universities are highly ranked in her subject area, which are in English, and which have overall low cost tuition fees. So, even if you don't land a scholarship, the tuition fee in the case of CEU is not more than 7,000 euros. So, the key lesson I want to kind of impart to our listeners is keep a global approach rather than just a country specific approach. Canada and Australia, I know, are also very popular destinations, but by and large, full tuition scholarships are hard to come by. So, in the future, I think Scandinavian countries will become increasingly popular, Rania, because the number of English courses being offered are greater, rankings are really good, overall cost of tuition is low, and scholarships are still available for the most part. During the last few minutes of our podcast, Rania, I would like you to touch on one concern I hear from parents. Once again, because there is somehow this apprehension and fear about Europe. Tell me your experience of being a Pakistani Muslim in Austria. What do you feel, and give viewers your honest feedback. What do you feel over there? Do you feel that there is some kind of phobia against or Muslims? What is the atmosphere?
Well, the school I went to was international, and the university I'm going to is very diverse. And I would say that they are just very, very liberal and very accepting of every religious ideology, every race, and just basically everything. And they're very, very liberal, as you can say. And also, when I was going out in public in Vienna, I did not feel that anyone was being racist towards me or something. And I have a friend from Pakistan who also wears the hijab. And personally, in Vienna, she said that she didn't feel anything like that. In Germany and Austria, especially in Vienna, there are actually a lot of immigrant families, and a lot of women wear hijab. And I would say that from the personal experience of a lot of people, um, certain countries in Europe are a lot more accepting than the US.
Wow, I think that's a remarkable observation for someone who's traveled so widely, and for you to make that comparison. Which parts of the US have you been, Rania? So let's just dive into this a little bit more.
Oh. I have not been to the US, but I was saying that I have
Mm-hmm.
friends who
Oh,
have
okay.
been to the US and have been to Europe, and from their experience, uh, people in certain countries in Europe were more welcoming than certain areas in the US. But as we all know, the US is very, very, very large, so it all depends on where you go. Like a certain random town in the US is going to be less accepting than a big city. So
Sure.
it
Fair
comes down
point.
to.
No, I think that was a very important point for you to share with listeners from your own experience of being in these European countries. And I hope that after this particular podcast, students will now cast their university nets wider and more strategically. So with that, Ranea, thank you so much for taking out the time to join us on this edition of the Inside Scoop. I'm so grateful that you've taken this time to be with us, given that it's your last break before you dive into college. So grateful that you can join us all the way from Vienna, and thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you. Bye.